Okay, let's talk Houston. So stopping Donovan Smith is going to be the key. Dual threat quarterback from the Cougars, the transfer from Texas Tech. He's having a nice season. And then a name you'll probably be familiar with if you follow TCU closely, Matthew Golden, their wide receiver, a guy the Frogs were heavy on in the recruiting process. We'll break that down as well as Doug Belk's defense. That's all coming up next here on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're getting close to 1,000 subscribers, which is really cool. So I'd love to hit that mark sooner rather than later. But please subscribe if you haven't. You can also subscribe to this podcast wherever it is you find it in its audio form. We're talking Houston today. These are two really interesting teams, Houston and TCU. These next two games for TCU are super important. They're playing Houston this week, first Big 12 conference game, Big 12 opener for Houston. So I'm sure it'll be a nice atmosphere, that evening at night game on Fox, primetime, all those good things. But Houston and SMU, you're facing two teams that can score, facing two teams that have some explosive athletes, and need to find a way to get 3-1. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect. I know this team is still kind of growing into itself. There's a lot of new faces. There's a lot of guys that they're trying to still get acclimated. They were a little banged up last week, missing some players. So I'll be interested to hear what Sonny Dykes has to say this afternoon. I'm recording this Tuesday morning. But all that being said, just huge week for TCU. They're taking on Houston, their Big 12 opener. Then they get SMU, and you need to find a way to get 3-1. Because if you end up 2-2 after these two games, if you split these two games one way or the other, then you're talking about a team that is going to have to really turn it up down the stretch in Big 12 play after that to get to a place where they can reach, the goals at the start of the season. You have that tough 5-game stretch at the end of the year where you play, and it's not in this order, but I know it's these teams off the top of my head: Texas, Texas Tech, Baylor, Oklahoma, and Kansas State. And that's going to be a gauntlet, right? And so you have to find a way to cushion that record as much as possible. You already had a loss to Colorado. Need to find a way to win these football games. So what are going to be the keys with Houston? This is the team that I can't really figure out. The Dana Holgorsen era has been interesting. In 2021, they went 12-2 and had a really good season, right? I mean, they made it to the American Conference Championship game. They played Cincinnati, and it looked like they were on their way to being sort of the class of that conference. And then, of course, they end up, moving on to the Big 12. But last season came back down to earth a little bit. And so now you got Dana there again. And what is it going to look like moving forward? In 2021, you were 12-2. In 2022, you were 8-5. And now you're in another year, first year of the Big 12. Got a lot of new faces. How are you going to handle that? And it really starts with they split their first two games. They beat UTSA, which UTSA we know is one of the best teams in the group of five. Jeff Traylor's done a great job there. And that was a defensive game. They won that game 17-14. They caused Frank Harris to turn the ball over. They had 3 interceptions in that game. So that was a nice win for them to start the season. Okay, you survive. You beat a good UTSA team to start the year. And they turn around and play Rice. And that's the Battle of the Bayou Bucket. That's a rivalry game. But I believe it's a game that Houston has won 9 straight years. It's a rivalry that they have dominated. And now that they're in Power Conference football, you feel like that's a game they should win pretty handily. Rice with JT Daniels jumps out to a 28-0 lead. And that game got out of hand early. It was 28-0 early in the second quarter. Now, Houston comes back. They actually tie that game up, send it into overtime, but end up losing in double OT because they couldn't convert a 2-point conversion, had some penalties that really cost them, but just kind of a head-scratching loss. And they said after the game, some of their players said that they were looking ahead to next week. They were looking ahead to games, down the stretch, further on in the schedule, and maybe they weren't completely focused for that Rice game. And so now they're trying to bounce back and play TCU. I'm sure it's a team that's going to be hungry, motivated, ready to get after it. So who are the Cougars? What do they do well? What are they going to try to attack TCU with? And it really starts with Donovan Smith. And if that name is familiar to you, Donovan Smith was a quarterback at Texas Tech last few seasons. He actually, in that kind of musical chairs quarterback situation they had last year because of injuries, he won the game against Texas. Like, he came in that game and played really well, and they defeat Texas in Lubbock, and that was a huge deal early in the season for them. But eventually, Tyler Shook took back that job when he was healthy, and he kind of saw the writing on the wall. Okay, I'm not going to get playing time here. I'm not going to be the starter. And so he decides to move on, and now he's there at Houston. And he is a dual threat guy that they're going to use a lot in the running game. One of the first things I noticed when I started breaking down their games and looking at the stat sheet is he's got 29 carries for 88 yards on the season. He's got the most carries on the team for an individual. Now, Tony Mathis Jr. and Tony Mathis Jr. and Stacey Sneed are their two lead backs. They both have 16 apiece. So if you combine that production, then they're at 32 carries, and they have slightly more than Donovan Smith. But still, it's pretty obvious they're going to use this guy in the running game. And he's big, he's physical, he's tough to bring down, 6'5", 240 pounds. Like, he's the type of quarterback that you can run QB power with, that you can get behind your offensive line, and he's going to go between the tackles and make things happen. Now, the yards per carry haven't been amazing. Like, he's got 88 yards per carry so far this year. That's probably skewed a little bit because he's been sacked 6 times this season. He's thrown 1 pick. He's got 4 touchdowns through the air this season, 3 touchdowns on the ground. So again, you see that emphasis they have on using him in situations where it's a clear down and distance. He's got to get a couple yards. He's going to use that big frame to get in the hole, lean, and use his body to get first downs and get touchdowns. A 60% completion percentage so far this year, really throwing the ball well. Did a nice job in that game against Rice after they finally settled in and got going. He's an experienced QB. I don't think he's a guy that's going to make a ton of mistakes. TCU's going to have to find a way to get after him and be effective. And, they've been good against the run game this year, and Houston's rushing stats aren't incredible. Tony Mathis is a West Virginia transfer. He's averaging 6.1 yards per carry. He's got 98 yards on the season on 16 carries. Again, I mentioned Stacey Sneed earlier, who's another one of their lead backs. But really, what stands out to me about this offense is the athleticism at the wide receiver position. And we know that TCU has struggled early on this year with pass coverage. Some of that is scheme, and some of that is these linebackers and safeties have been put in tough spots. I know a lot of people are frustrated with just the cushion that they're giving wide receivers, especially in the slot, and kind of allowing some easy throws. But the player that jumps off the page to me, and I realize he's not leading the team right now in production, but Matthew Golden has 9 catches for 96 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Golden was heavily recruited by TCU. He ends up picking Houston, but he's a dude. He had over 500 yards last year as a true freshman. He's already got 3 touchdowns this season. He's a great athlete. He can run, and is just a good wide receiver to have in that room. 6 feet tall, 190 pounds. I think he would have been great in TCU purple, but didn't work out. He ended up at Houston. He's obviously thriving there, so he's a special player. Their leader in receiving yards is Samuel Brown, and he's having a really good season. 15 receptions for 244 yards, and he's averaging about 16 yards per catch. He's from Savannah, Georgia originally, and he transferred in from West Virginia, so another West Virginia transfer. Now, he's been at Houston for a couple seasons now, so it's not like he came over this offseason. And then Joseph Manjack originally he went to USC. He's been at Houston for a few years. Wasn't super productive last year, but already has over 100 yards receiving this season at 102. So they're spreading it out. It's really those 3 guys. So Brown, Manjack, and Golden. Everybody else has minimal stats at this point in the year. So they're going to spread it around to those 3 players. I really think Golden is the key, though. He, in my mind, is the dude that's really special and kind of has that next level ability, and TCU is going to have to find a way to slow him down. I still really believe in these corners. I think Josh Newton's played well. I think Avery Helm has played well too. To me, the conversation is, how do you find ways to not put so much pressure on these safeties to continually, man up and be in coverage situations where they're having to cover for a long time by themselves, because that's not working. And the linebackers too, but the linebackers, it's more, swing patterns, short stuff. And that's more of a team issue, as far as you got to find ways to make tackles in space and get those guys to the ground. But the isolating of the safeties has been a huge issue. And so I don't know how Houston's going to move their players around, but I'm sure they're looking at ways to create favorable one-on-one matchups, as every offense in the country is. Moving on to the defense. So Doug Belk is one of the great coordinators in college football, defense coordinator there for Houston. He's been there, I think this is his 6th season with the Cougars, and his name comes up frequently for head coaching jobs. He runs a 4-2-5 scheme, and he's a fantastic DC. Now, again, kind of the head-scratching thing so far, right at the moment, they're 115th in total defense. TCU is 107th. Of course, those team stats at this point don't mean a ton, because they're pretty skewed. It's such a small sample size. They played really well against UTSA, but then against Rice struggled, especially early in that football game. I'll say the thing that stood out immediately to me, though, when I watched some of Houston's games and have just been looking at what they've done, they forced turnovers. They forced Frank Harris into 3 interceptions. They picked off JT Daniels once. I know they forced a fumble against Rice as well. And so they're getting after the ball. They're trying to make plays on the ball. They're trying to flip the game and flip the momentum. And that's TCU's going to take care of the football. I mean, that's football 101 every single week. You got to do that. But this is an opportunistic defense that wants to make big plays and wants to make splash plays. And so you're going to have to find a way to take care of the ball. Chandler Morris will have to be efficient, and he can't get locked in to one read. He's going to have to go through his progressions and try to make plays, because this is a team that can really get after you and flip the game with their aggressive style and their ability to make plays on the football. Malik Robinson's leading the team in tackles with 13. Nelson Caesar is off to a great start. He's got 3 sacks on the season. He had 3.5 last year, so he's already almost reached his season high from last year. He's the only player on this team that's recorded sacks, though, and so he's going to be the key, the guy to slow down, at least for the first few games. He has shown to have the best ability to get to the quarterback. And then Malik Fleming has 2 interceptions on the year, one of their defensive backs. So, if you throw his way, there's a decent chance that he can make a play on the football. So that's kind of a primer on Houston. We'll talk more about them as the week goes on. We'll have Parker Ainsworth from Locked On Coogs on Thursday's show. We'll record that Wednesday night, and so he'll have more details on what Houston's doing well, what happened last week in that Rice game, and how they're trying to move forward after a rough showing. When we come back, Texas Tech landed 5-star wide receiver Micah Hudson last night. There was a time this offseason where I really thought TCU had a chance to assert their will and become kind of the new power in the new Big 12. But with all the different teams that have joined, has this become a more muddled situation? We'll discuss that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. Let's talk about the best ticketing app around, Gametime. Okay, if you need to buy tickets on the secondary market, it's hard to know who to trust. There's all these fees, there's all those different things. Listen, go to the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app now, and if you're a first-time user, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off. You can get tickets to comedy shows, music, theater, and of course, sporting events and football games. And most importantly, you can get tickets to TCU football games. I'm looking at the Gametime app right now. They got tickets in the third deck at this Houston game for $19, and the second deck for $20. Upper sideline, $21. A lot of good deals here. You can use that $20 promo code and get significantly off those tickets, $25. One thing I love about the Gametime app, as I'm scrolling through here right now, I can see exactly, if I buy these tickets, I can see exactly where I'm going to sit. I can see what the field view looks like, and everything. And so that's one of the really convenient things about the Gametime app. Also, the tickets are sent right to your phone. And so you don't have to worry about, okay, where is this? Does it go to my email? Does it go to my wallet? Like what happens? No, it just goes straight to your phone. They're all mobile. They're right there for you. It's convenient. It's easy to use. Gametime, they have last minute deals. And so you don't have to feel, if you're like, I don't know if I want to buy today. Well, you can wait a little bit. That's fine. Typically, these prices will go down. But I know a lot of you are near Houston. That trip to Houston is not that far. If you want to go to a game, if you want to go to this game, use the Gametime app. They have great deals on TCU football. Again, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price, and it's guaranteed. All right, so one note just on TCU football and scheduling. SMU game is going to be an 11 a.m. kick. So that game in Fort Worth a week from Saturday, 11 a.m. I know a lot of you that tailgate that go to the games, you don't love that time slot. I get it, but that is what it is, and maybe that'll be the last one for a while. If they had a few night games here, I think a lot of the Big 12 games are going to be in good time slots. But of course, I say that like Fox has really pivoted, and they've made 11 a.m. their premier time slot. But 11 a.m. kick for SMU, so react to that accordingly, however you feel about it. You can let me know in the YouTube comments or on Twitter. I'm at Simcox-Steven. The show is at LockedOnTCU. So last night, Texas Tech, they landed Micah Hudson, 5-star wide receiver from Lake Belton. I've known about Micah for a while. He goes to high school about 45 minutes from where I live. I cover Temple High School, which is like right there next to Belton, Lake Belton. And Lake Belton's a pretty new school. They formed along with Belton ISD, I think 3 or 4 years ago. This is actually, I believe, their first season playing UIL like standard football. They've been playing football, but they've been playing an outlaw schedule the first couple of years. I don't think you actually care about this. I'm just kind of, I guess, rambling to myself. But Mike is at Lake Belton, which is a pretty new school, and they have good athletic programs there and a lot of great athletes. But he's a 5-star wide receiver, and it's been rumored that it might fall that way for a while. TCU's never been – I mean, they had Micah on an unofficial visit, I think, before the season last year, and obviously they wanted him like everybody else. But it didn't seem like they really gained much traction there. But there'd been a lot of momentum around Micah Hudson in Texas Tech. I didn't know if they could actually land him, but they did it. And I was talking to some people in the recruiting industry last night after that news broke, just to kind of get a feel for, okay, what was the key here? Was it NIL, which Texas Tech is doing a good job with NIL money? And I had multiple people tell me, for whatever this is worth, I'm sure he's getting taken care of in that department. But honestly, like he's had a good relationship with Joey McGuire. Really, like back when Joey McGuire was at Baylor, that relationship started. And then when he got the Tech job, Micah was immediately the first guy they kind of prioritized. Tech was his first offer. And he's just always appreciated that coaching staff. And so this was really more relationship based. They got it done. And it's a huge, huge get for them. But what I really wanted to talk about within this segment that relates to this news, when Texas and Oklahoma left, one of the big discussion points around the Big 12 was this idea of, okay, who's going to take over the power vacuum in this league? Because while Texas hasn't been like the leader on the field for a long time, they were from a recruiting standpoint, a brand standpoint, and now it looks like they might be the leader on the field again after what they did in Tuscaloosa against Alabama this past Saturday. And Oklahoma had that great run where they were winning Big 12 championships year in and year out in football. But everybody wondered, okay, who's going to be the next team to step up? And I think a lot of teams had arguments. Like they could talk themselves into, no, we're going to be the program that is next, right? But I honestly felt, when this originally happened, when Texas and OU left and they added the 4 schools, Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and Houston, that TCU was in the best position moving forward. And I think TCU is still in a really good position. There's great facilities at TCU. I think Sonny Dykes is a really good coach. I feel like he understands the way college football is changing. And there's great leadership with Jeremiah Donati, and TCU wants to be good. They're committed to this. They're not just sitting on the side hoping that something happens. They're actively trying to be good at all sports. And I've seen a huge investment across the board from them in the last few years. But the league has changed so much just in the last few months. You had Colorado, which I mean, Colorado's going to be a factor as long as Deion Sanders is there. Now, I don't know how long Deion is going to stay in Boulder. He might jump to a bigger job at some point, even though I feel like, Shedeur is eligible to go to the draft after this year. He could stay for 2 more seasons, though. I think he'll probably be at Colorado as long as Shedeur is playing college football. That's just speculation on my part. But as long as he's there, they're going to be a factor. I think they're suddenly the leader in the clubhouse for the number 1 quarterback in the 2025 class. He's going to use the transfer portal really effectively. He just gets talent. That's what he does. Utah has been added. Utah is not a team that's going to win signing day each and every year, but they develop really good players. They have a clear system. They're physical. They play tough. They play mean, and I mean that in the best way possible. I think what Kyle Whittingham is doing is, like, if the Gary Patterson era continued and Gary was still doing really well, his teams would look like what Utah looks like today. Just tough, physical, get the job done, hit people, don't apologize about it, all those things. Arizona State's got a good young coach in Kenny Dillingham. Arizona's got like a 5-star edge player in this cycle, which is kind of crazy. And then UCF has really hit the ground running since they joined the league, and they have a ton of momentum on recruiting right now. And they're in a fantastic location in Florida. That's a huge school. Like, I don't think people realize like how big that school is and how big their alumni base is. So you look at the 2024 recruiting rankings. Texas Tech is at number 1, UCF at 2, Arizona at 3, TCU at 4, Cincinnati at 5. And so it's not like you have to look far down the list to find TCU. They're in 4th place at the moment. And if you look at the average recruiting rankings, which means, you get points for every player that you land, and this is via 247 Sports. And then there's just, if you take away like how many commits there are, because different teams have a different number of commits each cycle. But if you just look at the average ranking of the players that you land, TCU is 3rd on that list. So they're right there in the mix. But where I thought they would have a great chance to kind of be maybe head and shoulders eventually better than everyone else in this department, there's more competition now than I imagined. And it's because, you got schools that are committed to this. Like Texas Tech has a wealthy alumni base. They got a good coach in Joe McGuire who's very energetic. Now they're 0-2 at the moment, right? And so they're going to have to figure that out. They're struggling. They lost that game to Wyoming, and then they lost to Oregon. I still think that's a good football team, but they're going to have to turn things around. And they're doing a nice job on the recruiting trail. UCF is doing a great job regionally, getting 4-star guys in the state of Florida. Colorado is not high on this list right now, but with Deion and that coaching staff, they have a high ceiling. So this is going to be tough, and TCU is going to have to stay committed to building their NIL collective, and to just staying relevant and staying good, being consistently a solid team that contends for conference championships. And they can do that, and they can do that this year, but they're going to have to do that consistently to get to the places where they want to go. And I think even in the last few months, the landscape of this league has just changed a ton, and it's become a tougher job for Sonny Dykes and company. And I know that he's up to the challenge, but that was just kind of another wake-up call for me last night, watching that play out. And, yeah, Tech has landed a big-time wide receiver in Micah Hudson, 5-star player out of Bell County, plays his high school ball there at Lake Belton. When we come back, I'll run down some of the reaction to yesterday's show. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. All right, if you want to make some money, FanDuel's the place to go. You can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. The NFL season has started. Aaron Rodgers, that was crazy last night. They fear he might have tore his Achilles, hurts himself on that first drive for the Jets. Feel bad for the guy. I mean, that's just a horrible situation. But FanDuel still has this deal going on. Right now, if you're a new customer, you can bet $5 on an NFL game and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet at least $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. You can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel is the official betting partner of the NFL. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon, or download their easy-to-use app. It's easy to navigate. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. So yesterday I had kind of a more robust reaction to that game against Nicholls State. I was just talking about how I felt better about things after I rewatched it and thought about it more. There's still concerns, but I think these are things that they can figure out. And I feel like their approach to the game was intentionally sort of vanilla and sort of like, okay, let's just try to get out of here with a victory and feel good going into the Houston game. One YouTube user, Avenger Combat Conditioning, says, glad we got the win, but still not sure this team has what it takes mentally to compete. The athletes are there, but the desire to take the field doesn't seem to be there. Hopefully they get it together in the next few weeks. Go Frogs. Yeah, I mean, like the mentality and the mental toughness, I think those are things that we took for granted with last year's squad because they did that so well and they did it so consistently. And so you just kind of assumed that this team would take on that identity as well, but every team's different. And so they're going to have to figure themselves out. They're going to have to find whatever it is that motivates them. And, I said this after the Colorado game. I really hate to criticize effort and intensity. I felt comfortable doing it after the Colorado game because Sonny mentioned it. And then even against Nicholls State, there seems to be something missing. But it's the second game of the season. I'm confident they can figure it out. They did lose a lot of leadership, though. And someone mentioned – I don't know if I talked about this yesterday or not. Someone mentioned to me as well, like last year's team sort of bungled through the first few games of the year, right? Like they beat Colorado, but it wasn't super convincing. They won that game 31-13. They had a 7-6 lead at halftime. And they beat Tarleton handily. They beat SMU. It was a one-score game. Didn't really feel like a one-score game, but it ended up being a one-score football game. And SMU, had chances in the second half to take the lead. And then they went and they just blitzed Oklahoma, and suddenly the entire season changed. And they survived a game against Kansas, and they had comeback wins against Oklahoma State and K-State, and you looked up, and it's like, oh, man, they're 7-0. But that team, like our expectations for that team were very different. Now, some of you thought they were going to be great because you told me that all year. But I was thinking like 7 wins. I know a lot of people were thinking like, okay, let's just get back to bowl eligibility, respectability, get this thing moving in the right direction. And they totally blew those expectations out of the water. Now we're talking about a team that has Big 12 championship expectations. And so I feel like that skews our perspective as well. Just the fact that last year's team overachieved so much, and now we have so many expectations for this group that we're viewing how they're playing differently. But I agree with you. I think the mentality and the intensity has to get ramped up. Jack Daddy Slim said something similar. He said, compared to last season's TCU team, it seems like this team is lacking heart and energy. I want to see if Chandler Morris has any dog in him, and if so, how much. I just kind of went on about the effort and intensity. I think Chandler's a different player than Max, and we just got to allow him to be who he is. And I felt like he showed some toughness last week. The way he ran the ball, he showed that the game's slowing down for him a little bit more. He's processing things better, and I think he's going to continue to get better. I believe in Chandler Morris. I think he's a good quarterback. He's going to improve as the year goes on. Maybe he doesn't have all the outward leadership qualities that Max does, but Max was a rare individual, and I think Chandler can still be really effective for this team. And he might be a great leader behind closed doors. We don't really know. He just doesn't show the outward emotion that Max does, but he doesn't have to. He just needs to be his own person. David says, hit the panic button. If you exclude Morris' scrambles, they only had 60 yards rushing against Nicholls State. How are they not ultra motivated to change the narrative after 2 devastating losses? And he also said a red flag was the defense allowing a long scoring drive in the third quarter. Yeah, they didn't run the ball well against Nicholls State. That's not a good thing. If we're taking an optimistic view, I'm just hopeful that, one, I know Nicholls State was loading the box and really selling out to stop the run. And then also maybe the O-line just wasn't in the best place to be super motivated. But I think A.J. Ricker's a good coach. I feel like they'll get those things figured out. But yeah, running the ball wasn't good on Saturday, and they're going to have to do that better all year long if they want to be effective. But they ran the ball really effectively against Colorado. So I believe in this O-line. I'm hopeful that Saturday was just kind of a fluky thing. Zoom Play says they'll open up the playbook this Saturday. Yeah, I think they'll have to. I mean, they're gonna run a lot more variations and different things between these SMU and Houston games than they did against Nicholls State. Big Easy said this year's team seems to lack speed and quickness on both sides of the ball. I think defensively there's certainly less speed. D. Winters is a guy I feel like that we're missing a lot, his sideline to sideline speed. And from an offensive standpoint, once they're healthy, I feel like we'll figure out if that's true or not. Obviously, like Darius Davis was a speedster, and Kendra could get to the second level and go on somebody. But I mean, they got guys that I think are explosive, so we'll see how that plays out as the year goes on. Tanner McKinney says we need to find the right 1-2 punch at running back. Trey hasn't done much. Neither has Battle, and Cam Cook has not played. Yeah, I'll talk about that later this week, but you're right. The running back situation is a little tenuous right now. Behind Amani Bailey, there's just not a lot of juice, and so we'll see how that continues to develop. Vincent Pryor says 5 games. We won't know who this team is until halftime of the 5th game. First games are always tricky. He's concerned about Chandler's headspace. He feels like he's just waited his whole life for this. Maybe he's putting too much pressure on him. And he feels like TCU and UH should have been played at NRG Stadium because he's expecting a sellout. I think there's going to be a good TCU contingent at that Houston game. And I'll take your word for it. We can all practice some patience here. It's been 2 games. We're going to figure out who this team is as the year goes on. Matt Jennings tomorrow, we'll talk to him about the Nicholls State game and then moving forward. Locked On Horned Frogs, it's your team every day.